What is a mangrove? That's the question the wise old silvered haired professor asked me as he held my paper that he was criticizing. He looks at it and he points and he says, "The first word right here is mangrove. Go ahead and tell me what a mangrove is." Now, this was a man who was in his 70s and had been an ecologist for 50 years, and he clearly knew what a mangrove was. He wasn't asking because he wanted to know, he was asking because he wanted to hear what I knew, or so I thought. So, young graduate student Bert puffed up his chest and recited the best off the cuff definition I could of, sir, a mangrove is any type of lignified emergent vegetation in estuarine or coastal situations. Uh, Whatever I came up with. And he said, "You missed my question. What I mean is, plant A," I went on to go into the taxonomic details of the local endemic species of mangroves. And he picks one that I had said, and he said, "Plant A, um, we consider a mangrove, yes?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What about this other plant that you didn't list? That's not a mangrove." I said, "True." So what's different about them? They both fit the same definition you just gave. Oh, it's a tough one. I guess it's just convention, I said. He was making a lesson. He was trying to demonstrate to me that our word mangrove, the word in the language that we use to describe these trees, has nothing to do with the trees themselves. Those trees don't care. We've clustered them together in a group that's an artificial category. And in us giving them a definition, we have failed in some way to fully include all of the members by some definition and exclude others by some definition. And it turned out he was trying to illustrate that over categorizing things, especially in ecology, but in life in general, can be problematic. And what I want to talk about is how a word, even in a very specific scientific setting like that, between two people who were very fluent and conversant in the very specific scientific definitions of those words, could still fail, or our language could still fail us, even when using very specific definitions. In spoken language, as you watch me, I gesticulate with my hands, I have facial expressions, I slow my speech down, I speed it up, I get louder and softer. I have all kinds of other ways to communicate meaning other than the individual words. My verbalized pauses, stopping and saying giving more emphasis to some things versus others, helps you to understand what I'm saying, hopefully. Um, as writers, we don't have the luxury to include all of those other nuances, all of those other forms of communication. Um, Sign language is non spoken visual communication that isn't written. I think there are languages that are gradients between the two. Some languages must include more gesticulations and are maybe like hybrid languages. So I don't think we should really think of spoken language as entirely just verbal or written. Language as it evolved, pre literacy language, was visual as well as auditory. So we get tons of additional information from the intonations of our voice and the dynamics of how we speak and our body language and how we move. And as writers, we are missing all of that. We rely just on the words themselves. And if I type something out, even if I say something, the meaning can sometimes not pass well from one person to another. And definitions can be extremely important. Definitions of words can be life or death, right? Definitions for words can be some of the most important things that as humans we agree upon or disagree upon. The definition of what one type of gun versus another for a law. How many parts can you take away from the ship of Theseus before it stops being the ship of Theseus? Well, if you define something as a gun, what does it mean to be a gun? On the drive in here, there was a story in the news about about violence overseas, and they were talking about civilian casualties. What does it mean for someone to be a civilian versus a combatant in a war? Does a combatant, a military personnel, need to have insignia that was issued by an officer? Do they need to get a paycheck? What's the definition? What are the criteria you have to list off? Maybe someone goes to work in a bakery all day and then picks up a rifle and fights a war at night. Are they a combatant or a civilian? Those kinds of definitions are extremely important and can literally mean life and death in many cases. All of law revolves so much around trying to make clear definitions of things that are difficult to define. And as writers, we rely on these assumptions that our readers will understand the words as we mean them. And sometimes we have fantastic words that would be the exact right word to use. And you can't really rely on an audience to know that word. It's a special kind of frustration to have a word that's really close for something. If you have a tangle of wires and you pull the wires apart, and in trying to untangle them, they make another sort of side twist. The word for that is called a plectoneme. It's a word that comes from people studying the shape of DNA molecules. If you used that word to describe a tangle of a USB cord that someone is trying to undo, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. If you said that to me out of context, I wouldn't know what you were talking about. It's the perfect word for that. It's a word for that very specific kind of tangle, but we can't really use it in common language because it isn't well known enough. So our assumptions of our readers' understanding of our words have to be strong, have to be pretty accurate. We have to really understand what our readers will get from the words we put on the page. And one thing that I want to express with this sort of constellation of ideas is that as writers, we can rely more than just on the dictionary definition of a word. And the idea that I want to impart to you is that a word might not really be the best basis, the smallest unit of a language. Some people would say, diphthongs or phonemes or chunks of words or syllables or words are the sort of building blocks of language. But pre-literacy language, where people are speaking, I believe language is, I don't just believe this, language is a way to convey an idea that's in my brain and try and get you to think the same thing or get you to think of the specific thing that I want. So I've got something in my head that I want to describe, and I need to have this magical incantation of spells and waving my hands around in a particular way that makes the synapses in your head fire in a particular order to come up with the same thought that I'm having in my head, which is literal magic. Or if we're writing, I'm going to put squiggles and special shapes of ink on paper that will cause the same hallucination in your brain, the same dreams, the same thoughts, the same ideas as I had in my brain. Maybe years later and hundreds or thousands of miles away, those squiggles of ink on paper will cause your brain to function in some way. I don't believe we should, as writers, consider the word to be the basis of our language. I think we should consider the idea or the thought to be the basis of our language. There are many words which work much better in combinations with others, and our meanings that we derive from those words expand when they're put in contexts that are familiar to us as readers or us as writers. So if you're struggling over writing, this is a long way to get to this part. If you're struggling over writing, trying to think, I don't have the right word for this, and you're going through the thesaurus and you're trying to figure out, is this word better or is that word better? Take a step back and look at the whole sentence or the whole paragraph or a chunk of a paragraph and read in the whole context, not just that word, but that idea that you're trying to put on the page. That word only supports a tiny little part of it. It isn't the basic building block of it. That idea has to be conveyed in its entirety. And the context that that word is in is supporting that idea that you're trying to convey. So broaden your writing out from word to convey whole thoughts. I think in that way we become more fluent in our own language. We become more conversant with our readers, and we convey our ideas more easily and more accurately. What the reader picks up is more close to what we're putting down. If that involves using colloquialisms or axioms or sayings, all the better, right? Use the tools that you have at your disposal to convey an idea, one idea at a time, not one word at a time. Don't get so fixated on finding that exact right word, because it might be the word plectoneme, and no one when I read your book and I see that word, I'm going to be like, hold on, that sounds familiar. And it'll be later that day that I go, I know what that was. So think ideas, don't think words. If this makes sense to you, or if this doesn't make sense to you, comment below, because the more we develop these conversations and the more we advance these ideas, the better our writing, all of our writing will be, and the more fun we'll have with this. So thank you.